Hey, in this lesson, we're going to be looking at the more fun stuff in keyboard land and learning kind of patterns and kind of playing patterns that you can use to spice up and kind of add a lot of vibe to something. This is my kind of answer to people if they're used to playing really frilly and really pretty, which I can't even really give you an example of because I'm not good at that. But the people who are all over the keyboard, and I'm sure some of you like to do that. And as a rule of thumb, we try to stick away from that. Try to stick to something more oriented on the subdivisions of rock and roll, like quarters and eighths and wholes and stuff. And so, which ends up being kind of boring for the piano player, and especially the piano player who's already being pushed into pads and things like that, which people generally have a negative viewpoint on. I quite enjoy it, but for those of you who want to play a little more, what you need to do is learn some patterns that really add to the vibe and add emotion to it. What I'm talking about with patterns are things that are repetitive and sound something, like this. Something like that, where it really adds a lot of, vibe to the chord progression. Something like that, that's just a 1 to 4, that normally might sound, on a pad, just sounds something like this. Ends up having a lot of energy when you go back and so basically there are a few things to know about these. One is that you have to figure out and get used to, it's playing with a click again. And in this case, you should probably learn to play to a click that has an accent on the 1. So if it's, I can actually give you an example of that right here. We use a program called Ableton Live for our click, and it has subdivisions in it. So you hear the 1 of the beat every time. Sounds like this. So that high beep is the 1, and every beep after that is a subdivision. And specifically here, it's really good to learn to play with that because with these patterns, there's only 3 notes there, and most songs are in 4/4. And so you have to figure out how to play them so that they line up with, with the beat. And so in this case, it's these are eighth notes, and so depending upon your time signature, eighths or quarters. But so you need to find a pattern of 8. So right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that's the pattern. 4, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, so on and so forth. Sounds very simple, but what you'll find is if you don't do that, it can get a little hairy and you can start getting confused and, playing. And all of a sudden you're playing in 6/8 without knowing it and hard to keep up and everything. And that's a pretty simple pattern. Some of them get a little more interesting where you're, and so you need to really be able to keep track of the 1. The other thing that's important to know is that the majority of these are repeatable once you get them. Some of them follow the chords, like the first example I gave you, but most patterns you'll find, or the fun ones, are ones that you can repeat over an entire chord progression. So, the example I was just using is a song we do with Jesus Culture, I Want to Know You, and it's and so that pattern, is pretty repetitive over 3 chords, but it ends up working really well in the song and kind of became the signature hook of that song. That particular pattern, I'm going to play real quick over a couple different chord progressions, and you'll see it just kind of keeps working. It works. I didn't change a dang thing over, a ton of different chord progressions. And the rest of the chords in that key, with the exception of one, are just, different bass notes to one of the chords I played, so it would work. So let's look at a few of the practicals with that. There are a few patterns. One's going to be something like that, where you're walking. You'll find they're all focused around the third. Again, we really like that third. That third is kind of the emotion note, if you will. It can also be the happy fun note, which we want to avoid a lot of times, but it's the emotional note. And I think it's because it's one of the spots in a key where the next note up is only a half step, and there's some tension in that. It seems to me there's some tension in that. So there's this half note, and so there's a lot of different ways you can use that. So one is like that. Another one is what I showed you earlier, which is taking an inversion, the first inversion, and walking around that. So I can go 1 to 4 to 5, and it would sound like this. And that works really well. You can keep walking around with that, and it's kind of works in any key. And again, I can take it out and kind of use it over any progression. That one lends itself well to chord changes, but just like I was talking about with the other pattern, I can play that exact same thought over most chord progressions. In this case, all I'm doing is changing one note, changing the bass note, in this case, the root note, to follow the chords. So on the 6, I'm hitting the E, because that's part of this A minor chord. The 4, I move up to the F, and then the 1 back down to the E, and then for the 5, down to the D. So. Another one is going to be more of the opposite of that, And actually here, let's wait, before I move on, let's look at that one more time, because you can actually keep moving up. You don't have to repeat. You could do which has a completely different vibe. And a lot of this is going to have to do with playing by ear and kind of getting your ear developed. But you'll notice the majority of both of those patterns were exactly in the root of that chord. So the other pattern, if you're going to call the one I just showed you ascending, where you're going up the keyboard, the next one is going to be the descending pattern, which is the opposite. You find the note you want to start on and go down the keyboard. Again, this is going to revolve around thirds. So if you take your root chord and go up a couple inversions, you'll be at the second inversion, and you can kind of do this, walk up around, use the sus, and kind of walk around that. Which this kind of pattern will end up working over any chord progression again, so I can just kind of hit whatever bass notes I want in that key, and it's going to work. And just like the other pattern, this pattern lends, these kinds of patterns all lend well to changing up a note. So you could, and it would be nice. And a lot of times I'll change up that last. I'll repeat it 3 or 4 times, or repeat it 3 times, and that 4th time to keep a pattern again. I would change it up. With these patterns, you wanna if you are doing change ups, it helps a lot to create a sense of continuity and create patterns within patterns. So this is the pattern, but if you're going to switch it up and do this thing, I would do it every 4th time, because that keeps the pattern going. And then the final one that I want to show you is going to be one that I'm not allowed to play the actual song, but if I play something that's not the song, you'll remember what song I'm talking about. And so it's kind of this rhythmic thing that everyone and their mom knows. which, as you can see, works over other things. I try to avoid that as much as possible because it sounds like the song I'm not allowed to name a lot, but it is something worth mentioning because it's the opposite of the pattern I started with. All right, it's just the opposite. And so, yeah, so it helps a lot to learn these patterns. They're great things to pull out in the middle of a set. And they, you know, and again, these are just kind of my versions of these patterns. You can walk, or you can do all sorts of them. You know, you can take the descending one and just, and that's, you know, that's a different one. You can, there's a zillion of them. I couldn't show you all of them if I tried because I don't know all of them. But just that concept of finding these notes that sound good over every chord and kind of moving through them ends up creating a really great emotional feel, and is something you can pull out to kind of spice up your set and add a lot to a set. So yeah, practice these. We had the reverse, or the rhythmic one. We had the opposite rhythmic one, which sounds like the song that shall not be named. Right, and then we had the ascending one, which also sounds like a song that shall not be named. That was a little more obscure, though. And then you have one that's more pattern-based. We can name that song, though, right? And then you have straight descending. So yeah, spend some time on each one, kind of get familiar with it, to where you feel like you can kind of pull it out at a moment's notice. And yeah, they're really some great tools that are going to help diversify your playing.